Hi everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. This is our video number 5 on our series on Ansible for Absolute Beginner. And in this video, we're going to talk about Ansible modules. So let's start. Okay, so you can think of Ansible module as your main building block for your Ansible playbooks. So if you think about Ansible, and we talked about it initially when we started this series, Ansible is agentless, right? It doesn't run any agent on the remote server where it is trying to do the automation. Now, so if you think about it, how does Ansible achieves the task that it is assigned to do? So everything Ansible does is done using Ansible modules. You can think of Ansible module as your unit of code that can be used as a command line or in your playbook task to achieve certain things using Ansible. So for example, if you want to, let's say, create a directory on the remote server. Now Ansible doesn't know how to create a directory on the remote server. It uses module. So for example, file module to create the directory on the remote server. That module, which is your unit of code, contains all the logic that you need or Ansible needs to create a directory on the remote server. So let's say if Ansible is trying to create a directory on a Linux server, what Ansible will do is it will copy that module first to a temporary directory on the remote server. Then it will execute that piece of code along with the input parameters provided by user. So for example, if you're running file module would need path to the file that you are trying to create on the remote server, file permissions, user or group name that you want that file or directory to have. So all these kind of things user would pass either through playbooks or module or directly through the ad hoc commands, and then Ansible will run that piece of code or unit of code for file module on the remote server along with those input parameters to create the directory or file system or file rather for the user on the remote server. Now in certain cases, copying the code to the remote server is not possible. So let's say if you think about it, we are using Ansible to automate certain network devices, right? So in those cases, those devices might not have capability to run the modules directly on the remote server. In those cases, what Ansible does, Ansible will copy this piece of code, which is module, to a temporary directory on the local server from where we are running the Ansible, and then we'll execute those commands remotely. Again, if you are trying to execute or run Ansible against certain API endpoints, Ansible will do the same thing. It'll copy those modules to a temporary directory on the local server and then execute the task on the remote API endpoint against the API endpoint. So essentially, if you think about it, everything that Ansible does in its tasks through playbooks or command line is managed or done using modules. These modules are written with Python, using Python. So that's why Python is important whenever we want to run any automation using Ansible. This we talked about in our first video as well. And sometimes modules are also referred as task plugins or library plugins. Okay, let me move it to this side. So as you can see on this screen, in case of Linux or Windows host, Ansible will remotely execute the modules on the remote host directly. It will copy the modules, which is your piece of code, to the server directly first, and then will execute it on the target host. In case of network devices or API endpoints, it will do the local execution. That means it will first copy the code direct or to a temporary directory on the local file system, and then will remotely execute it against the network devices or API endpoints. Okay, so let's move to the terminal now. I will use this terminal to demo today's example to you. On the left side, I have my host machine, which is running the Ansible. And on the right side, we have the target machine, which is going to be our target for today's demo. So similar to Ansible and Ansible playbooks, the commands that we have already talked about in our previous videos, there is a command to read the documentation about modules, which is called Ansible-doc. So if you run Ansible-doc and then your module name, you'll get the documentation about that particular module directly from your terminal. Similar to that, if you run Ansible-doc-l, it will list all the available modules that are available for you to run on this system, host machine. Now, we'll look into the documentation a little later, but I just wanted to show you one thing. let me just try to count the number of documentation I have here. So if you see here, I have more than 8,000 plus Ansible doc for modules available on my machine. That means I have lots of modules to choose from. So for example, if I'm trying to write or choose my module for my automation, I have to choose from, I have like lots of options available, right? So to find the right module to achieve our end goal is important. And that's why Ansible has divided these modules into certain categories. And that's what I want to talk about next. So if you can see here on my screen, we have different types of modules, categories, and mostly we will be using few of them. For example, system modules would include all the modules that interacts with system. For example, if you are trying to stop or start a service, that type of module would be categorized as your system module. Whereas if you are trying to run certain commands on the remote server, those type of modules would be categorized under the commands module category. Similarly, if you're trying to run operations against database, all those modules could be categorized as database modules. Similarly, we have cloud modules, file module, and so on and so forth. So essentially, you have to first decide or identify the category where your module would most probably rely, and then you have to choose the module that you think would be the best suited for your automation needs. Okay, now along with that, in our docs.ansible.com, we have a module index where we have modules identified based on the category. So if you see here, all these categories that I talked about in my slide are copied from here. And for example, if I open the system module that I was talking to you about earlier, I know that service type of module is available under this category. So for example, if I want to start or stop a service, I'm going to use the service module, which is used to manage services. If I click on this link now, it has redirected me to the service module documentation. And here, if you see the sections, I have the synopsis, which tells us, which is basically describing what this module is doing, which is basically controlling the services on the remote server. And then there are certain parameters that we can pass to this service module, and some of them are optional. They have default values if we don't provide them. Then we have certain modules which are mandatory or required. For example, the name of the service is required, obviously, because Ansible needs to know what type of service we are trying to control. And then all other parameters required are optional, and some of them have default values if we don't provide them. So this is how you read the documentation for a module. Again, if you scroll down, you can see the example section of this module. Here you can see, if you see the first example, we are trying to start an HTTP server. If not a service, if not started, it's important to note that if not started, that means this would be idempotent. So if you see here, we are using the service module, which is going to take two parameters. One is the name, which is mandatory parameter, which is HTTPD, the name of the service. And then we have the state, the desired state, which is started. Now it's started, not starting, not start. The reason is we are saying if the service is already running, don't do anything, don't try to restart it or don't try to start it. If it is stopped, then we want the final state to be started. So that's why all of these Ansible modules are idempotent. They follow the principle of idempotency. And if we are running the same playbook again and again, we don't want to break the end system or the target system where we are trying to run the configuration, right? So that's why these key value pairs, the name of the target action is important. That's why it is mentioned as started, not starting or start. Again, we have different other state. If you want, we can have a stopped state, restarted state. So that means restart in any case, reloaded, right? Enable the service or disable the service, and so on and so forth. So again, same module based on the different input parameters can do different tasks for us. So that's how you identify a module based on its category. Once you start using Ansible for your day-to-day activities, identifying the module will become easier. Along with that, if you want, you can use this Ansible-doc, again -l command to list the documentation or the number of modules documentation available, and Ansible-doc -module name to read the documentation of your particular module. Again, you can use this to grab the similar kind of modules if you want. So for example, I'm looking for ping module. I don't know the exact module name. So what I can do is Ansible-doc -l grab ping. And if you see, it has printed lots of ping modules for me. And if I scroll to the top of this, the first one is your built-in ping module to try to connect to the remote host and verify if a usable Python is available. Then we have netcommon, netping, then we have Windows ping for Windows type of remote servers, and so on and so forth. So based on your target as well as your automation need, you have to identify the right module that would be best suited for your automation needs. Similarly, if you want to look at, for example, the command module, if I go back to now module index and if I open this command module in the new tab, again we have the command module to execute commands on the remote targets. We have shell module to execute the shell scripts or commands on the remote target. We have raw module that can execute a low down or dirty command without using the Ansible submodule functionality. So in case your script is not running using shell module, you can try the raw module. Similar to that, if your script is on the source server, then you can use script module to run a script on all the remote nodes. So script module will transfer the script to the remote nodes for you and then run it. On the other hand, if you want, you can use shell module to do the same thing. So you can use copy module first to copy the content of your local machine to the remote server, and then later on use shell script, or rather shell module, to run the same script on the remote server. So basically different types of module can be used to achieve similar kind of output, but it is always recommended to use the inbuilt module rather than using your own scripts using shell or raw modules. And the reason is quite simple, because these inbuilt modules are tested and are following the best practices available within Ansible, for example idempotency, rather than running your own script, transferring it to the remote server using Ansible first and then running it. Although if you want, you can use that also as well. So similar to that, if you want to run certain configuration management task against your cloud environment, you can use cloud module as well. So basically what I'm trying to say here is that you can use these module categories to narrow down your search when you're looking for the right module for your automation. Now let me give you a few demos. Almost all of them we have already covered in our previous lectures, but in those lectures the purpose of our demos was different, and in this one we are particularly focusing on modules. So let's just start with your very basic module, which is your ping module, which verifies the connectivity to the remote server, as well as ensures that the remote server has a valid Python which can be discovered by Ansible. So again, like I mentioned, on my left side we have the master and on the right side we have the target. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a inventory file. I'm going to call my remote host as demo host so that it's easier for me to identify it in our playbooks. And let's just run first module, which is ping. So what I'm going to do is, using a doc command, I'm running Ansible space all means against all the host in my inventory. I only have one host, -m, and then followed by the module name, which is in our case ping module. So we're using ping module. And now on the right side, let's do one thing. If you remember, I mentioned, right, that when Ansible is trying to run automation on a Linux based operating system, it will first transfer the module to a temporary location on the remote server. So the default location is your user's home directory, which we are using to connect to the remote host. So I am already in the user's home directory, and then there is a subfolder called Ansible. If I go to Ansible here and do ls, you can see there is a temp directory which is created here, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this directory. So what I'm just trying to show here is that whenever we run any module against our host, this directory will get recreated and Ansible will temporarily transfer this unit of code, which is ping module for us, to that remote host, and then we'll run the ping module. So let me do this, and now I'm going to give the inventory, which is inventory.ini. I've already enabled passwordless SSH, by the way, with my source and target. I'll probably create a different video because we have not covered that till now. In order to connect to the remote server, we need passwordless SSH, or otherwise we'll have to specify the username and password, which we have already talked about, by the way, in our first video. So if you don't know how this particular thing is being achieved, please go and look into our first video of this series, which is for Ansible, which is Ansible for absolute beginner. So now Ansible ping module returned ping pong, which is confirming that it has found a valid Python on the remote server, and the connectivity is also working. Now on the right side, if I do ls again, here you can see that the temp directory got created, which means that Ansible transferred this piece of code to the remote server first, and then executed that ping module on the remote server and got the feedback back, which was ping pong, which is what we discussed in our previous slide, that for automating Linux and Windows, Ansible connects to the managed node and pushes out small programs called Ansible Modules to them, and then executes them on the remote host, gets the response, and do the other stuff. So this is running the ping module using ad hoc command. And let me open VS Code here, and I'm going to run create a playbook to show you how to use module within your playbook. So you can see in GitHub, I have GitHub Copilot installed, so it's trying to give me suggestions. I'm not going to use it. Playing playbook example, and now I'm going to do host all. I'm not going to gather the facts. If you remember, in last video we have already talked about gather facts. These are inbuilt facts that Ansible provides us as variables, and if you want, we can use that. But in our case, we are just using simple ping playbook, so we are not going to use it. And now we are going to start the task. And again, because Copilot is quite intelligent, it understood that I'm trying to ping all hosts. So my task got created, and I'm now pinging the hosts. Let me go back to my terminal, and I'm just going to run it. And one interesting thing you would notice is that we will not see the output here. And the reason is because ping module is only going to ping, but we are not printing it to the screen. So I hope you'll understand in a minute. If I run this and give the inventory, again, looks like there is a typo, and yes, it is because we haven't typed the host correctly. Let me rerun it. Now, if you can see here, it's running the ping playbook example. The task is ping all hosts. Now it's trying to ping my remote host from my source host. Once that ping is complete, it will complete this task and will complete the playbook, but we will not be able to see the output ping pong. And the reason is because ping task is just performing the ping, but it's not printing out to the screen. And also we are not running it in the debug mode, the Ansible playbook. That's why we are not going to see the verbose of this ping task. So now you can see that, okay, ping was okay against the demo host because that's the only host we have in our inventory. But if you want to read what did the ping module got back, right? So again, we are going to use another module. It's called debug. So I'm going to say print ping output. Now I'm going to use debug module, but before that I need to register the output. So I'll say register the output of ping register in the ping register, and in the message of the debug module, I'm going to use this ping register as an output. So let's say now if I'm a complete newbie and I don't know what are the parameters required by print to print the output, right? So I don't know if it is called debug module, print module, XYZ module, right? So let's say we are at line number 7 and I know there is a way to register the output, but how do I print it? So what we can do is again use this Ansible doc module -l grep -i, and then we are going to oh sorry, we are going to search for print, and here you can see that there are lots of other print related modules, but the first one we got is ansible.builtin.debug, which is going to print the state of our whatever, right? So we can now see, okay, debug is something which can print something to us for us. So what we can do is we can go to our module index, look into all modules, and again search for the debug module. Again we found the debug module which says print statements during execution, which is what we want, right? We want to print the statement or the output of our task. And if you go to an example, it is saying, okay, we can use debug, and then there is a message that that will be printed out. So we can use this type of format in our playbook. Again, if we go to the parameter, it needs nothing is mandatory here. The message is the customized message that we can print out. If you want, we can just simply say war. So if I go to the playbook, I could have just said war ping register. That would also work. And if I now clear the screen and run Ansible playbook ping.yaml, against the inventory. Sorry, one thing we forgot. If we are just specifying the variable, we don't even have to specify it in the Jinja 2 format. We can just simply say variable name. So now this time it printed out the output for me, printed the discovered Python interpreter that it used to run the module, and the ping pong, which was the output of the module, which is what the module is doing. So this is an example of running a module using playbook or directly using the ad hoc command. Now let's see a couple of more examples. Let's see the command module demo as well. So let me create a new playbook called command.yaml, and I'm saying command playbook example task. Now the name is run command on remote host, and now we are going to use the command module, and the command module will not take any additional parameters. We can just say make directory temp hello.log, and before we run it, let's just confirm that we don't have the same directory on the remote host. So let me cat that file first. So as you can see that let me put it here. As you can see that temp hello log, no such file or directory. Now we are going to run the command module to run this command on the remote server that is going to create this file for us. On the left side, we clear the screen, Ansible playbook command.yaml -i inventory.ini. Now what it is doing is it's basically running the command on the remote server. And let me minimize this or put it here. So now you can see that it has created the file on the remote server. If I it says file not found, but it's on the left side it says file is there. So let's see. Sorry, it created the directory for us. I'm so sorry. If you see here, we created mkdir. We should have done touch rather than mkdir. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this directory temp hello.log. I'm so sorry about it. I created a directory. I wanted to basically create a file. So mkdir created the directory rather than creating the file. I'll rerun the playbook again. In this case, now it should create a file rather than creating a directory which it created for us earlier. So now as you can see, oops, if I do ls temp hello.log, the file now is there. If I see the content of that hello.log, obviously it will be empty because we have not added anything to that file. We just ran a simple command to touch or create the file on the remote server. So now let's just extend this example, and now let's try to add some content to this directory or this file rather. So add a line to file, and we are going to use, now let's see which module to use. So right, again, we don't know, we want to add a command, a line to file. So add line, let's search for line here. I don't know if we'll get anything related to line, but we have got lots of things related to line. And here you can see we have got AWS module, we don't want that. And here you can see we got Ansible built-in line in file module. So now if you want, we can read the documentation about line in file module again under the all module list, and we'll search for line in file. It says line in file manages the line in the text file. That's what we want to do. We are trying to add a line to our text file. If we go to the parameter section, there are lots of parameters. None of them is mandatory except for the path, which would be the path of your file, and that's it. So if you see again, we can use regex and so on and so forth using this module. For us, it's going to be a very simple use case. So we are going to use line in file and path, which is the same temp hello log, and the line that we want to add is, let's add that. Let's go back. Let's just reconfirm that the file doesn't have anything. If I do cat temp hello.log, we don't have anything. On the left side, if we run the playbook again against the remote host, we had the playbook was command.yaml -i inventory.ini. Now it's again going to try to create the file which it already has there. Oh, what happened? For some reason this host is unreachable. Let's see if there is an issue with that. I'll have to check this. Okay, so looks like there was a temporary connectivity issue between my host and the target. Again, anyway, I'm just rerunning the playbook, which has now additional module. Earlier we were running the command on the remote host, and now we are going to add a line to the file using the line in file module. Now, interesting thing I'll show you after this. So let me just first confirm the content of the file, which is again, welcome to VC Tech Talks. On the left hand side, both the modules are showing changed. Although the file already existed, command module still showed changed, because command we ran manually, right? So we are not using inbuilt module to create a file on the remote host. We are just using the command module to run a file on the remote host, and it is not giving the actual, it's not reflecting the actual thing that happened on the remote host, which was basically, it didn't do anything because the file was already there. So ideally this task should have been green rather than showing it as yellow. And in the play recap, we see changed 2, but actually there was only one change, which was to add a line to the end of file. That's why using the default or inbuilt module is important. You'll see it now, because if I rerun this playbook, the module that we used, inbuilt module, to add a line to the file, which was line in file module, this time is going to show us green, but the command module is going to show us yellow or golden yellow. And that's why it is always recommended to use inbuilt modules, because they reflect the true status of what Ansible did. In this case, although on the remote host there is nothing changed, if I run cat temp hello log, it's the same. But since we used our own mkdir command to create the file, Ansible didn't reflect the status as it should have been. On the other hand, since we used the inbuilt module, this time since the inbuilt module didn't do anything, it's showing us green here, which is reflecting the true status, because this time line in file module didn't add any. So that's why, this is a good example of why using the inbuilt module is always preferred, because they follow all these good practices. And in the play recap, now if someone is reading the play recap for this playbook and you're doing it in production, according to this playbook there was one change, but actually it didn't do anything, because everything that was supposed to be on the remote host is already there. The file already existed and the line in the file already existed. On the other hand, if we just remove this, and instead of using this I can use file module, and in the file module I can just give the path of the remote file, which was temp hello log dot log. The state is touch. Again, one thing I just wanted to show you is that you can also write the task without giving the name. You can just directly start by the module name, but although it's not a good practice because you don't know when you're reading the Ansible logs what is actually happening. But for the purpose of this demo, I'm just going to do this. Now here you can see that since I'm running the file module, probably for the first time it's going to show me the change, because it'll probably change the file permissions based on my umask. But after that, the next time when we rerun this playbook, it will show the true status of the operation performed against the remote host. So right now it's saying, okay, I changed the file, which is fine because this is the first time we are running this task. And add a line to the file should not change anything, because the line already exists on the remote server, which is what it did, right? So if you can see, add a line to the file is green. That means it did not change anything on the remote host. The line already existed. Now let's rerun it. So now if you see, after rerunning, the file module also said okay, no change, because file already existed. And in the play recap we can see that there is no change, because on the remote host, sorry about it, I again lost the connection to the remote host. Now if we again read the remote host, the file content did not change. That's why on the left side the playbook recap reflects the true operation that the playbook did against the remote host. Okay, so now we have looked into the ping module demo, command module demo, and a line in file module demo. We also looked into why it's also important to use the inbuilt module rather than running our own command using, for example, command module or shell module. Now let's consider a scenario. Let's say, although Ansible is providing more than 8,000, 9,000 modules for us to use, there could be a scenario if you are using or managing a complex IT infrastructure that you may need additional custom functionality which is not covered by Ansible by default. It could be, let's say, for example, you are provisioning your servers in cloud and you're automatically provisioning them, so you cannot keep track of how many servers are up, what are the new servers added on daily basis or weekly or monthly basis, and what are the servers getting decommissioned at the same time. So managing the static inventory in that case is impossible, and you might need a solution to manage dynamic inventory for your cloud solutions in order for you to manage them using Ansible. So in that case, the default inventory mechanism that Ansible provides will not be sufficient, right? There could be another scenario where you want to deploy custom resources to cloud based on your unique needs, and Ansible's built-in module might not be adequate enough to do that for you. In such cases where you need additional functionality on top of what Ansible offers by default, you can use Ansible plugins to extend the functionality provided by Ansible and customize them based on your unique needs. Your plugin is a piece of code that you can modify to enhance Ansible's functionality. Ansible ships in lots of built-in Ansible plugins for us to use. If we want, we can use them, or if we want, we can add additional uh, plugins for us. So if I go to Google and search for Ansible plugins, they have a very good documentation on how to work with plugins. So you can see that they have categorized these plugins into different categories. For example, the become plugin, right? So for example, if you're running a playbook against a remote server and everything is going fine, but in a certain task you have to become sudo or root, so you can use become plugin for that. So if I click the documentation for that, you can see here, right? So you can do use sudo, or you can become sudo or su using become module. You can say become true in that particular task. The Ansible will try to use sudo permission to run the task for you, right? So this is an example of plugin. Similar to that, let's say if you need event based actions. So for example, maybe you're installing certain services or adding some additional packages to the remote server. Once that task is completed, maybe you want to send a notification to MS Teams, to your clients, or send an email. So you can use callback plugins to do certain action based on certain events that happens within your playbook. Similar to that, if you're writing certain scripts which are very customized to your environment, and you think that those scripts are going to be used extensively within your infrastructure, you can write your own custom modules. Later on, when we talk about collection in our advanced course or series, we'll talk about how to create your own custom collection. But you know what, here what I'm trying to say here is that Ansible does provide you these functionality where if you want, you can enhance and add custom capabilities to existing Ansible code if you want. So you don't have to go very deep into it, but for now you need to keep in mind that if we want, Ansible plugins can be used to add custom capabilities to our default Ansible environment. So that's your Ansible plugin. In the end, I just wanted to give you these links. We have already talked about them, right? So how to categorize modules by category if you want, how to list the plugins, how to list all of the modules, and how to use Ansible-doc command to read module related documentation locally if you want, or you can use ansible-doc-l flag to list all the modules and use grep to search for the particular type of module if you are, for example, not sure what type of module you may want to use. Okay, so that's it for this video. I would really appreciate if you'll consider subscribing to my channel. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.